This is Series T, where we find the greatest entrepreneurs and investors in the world and force them to have tea with us live on air. I'm Imad Akun, founder and CEO of Mercury. And today, we've got Seth Bannon, who's an investor at 50 VC. Seth is an awesome person, but he's also deeply involved with some companies of his and trying to solve some of the problems that COVID-19 is bringing to our attention using technology. So what's been going on with, we know what's been going on with the world, but what's been going on with your portfolio companies?
Hey, it's good to be on. Yeah, so I'm a founding partner at a VC firm here in San Francisco called 50 Years. I think this has been the most intense 2 weeks of 50 years. And it's been really hard. Obviously, everyone is struggling and stressed out now. But we actually have 12 portfolio companies now that are directly addressing COVID. We just published on our website 50.vc. We now have a link at the top that just says COVID-19, and all of our companies that are actually addressing the crisis are right there. So we have everything from a company called Helix Nano, which is developing a multi-antigen mRNA vaccine, which will not only protect us from SARS-CoV-2, but potentially from mutations of SARS-CoV-2. So viruses tend to mutate. And so though you might be immune against one strain, it's no guarantee that you're immune against others. And so this is actually a vaccine strategy that will enable us to not only be immune against this one particular strain, but others if it evolves. We have a company called OpenTrons, which is working on scaling up the ability for CLIA labs to actually process the tests through automation. A company called Nurx, which launched one of the first at-home tests for SARS-CoV-2. The FDA unfortunately put that on pause, but there was just earlier today from United Healthcare a study done that showed that at-home swabs were exactly as accurate as physician-assisted swabs. And so we're actually quite confident that in the next week or so, the FDA will lift that restriction and allow testing to be done at home, which is really, really important. We have a company called BioRender. This is a great example of how everyone can find a way of helping. So they're basically a platform that allow biologists to speak visually by basically, instead of using PowerPoint, demonstrate your work in a more programmatic way. And they said our entire team is available if you're working on SARS-CoV-2, if you're working on COVID, to help you build your illustrations pro bono, no charge whatsoever. And we have a company called Solugen, which is using their infrastructure to just develop hand sanitizer and just ship it to healthcare networks around the country for free, right? So, everything from a company that's slightly deviating from their normal technology to apply that technology to this crisis, to companies that are saying, you know what, we're gonna focus on this even though this is not part of our core business, because this is such a national emergency. And we love that our founders have answered the call in the way they have.
Oh, look, it's Anaya. What a surprise. Thank you for the tea, sweetie. Hey. No, I know what you're going to do. She loves virtual background.
I have some genmaicha here. Oh, nice. And it's actually, it's authentic genmaicha. It has the roasted rice right in there.
We have tea together.
Cheers.
We have to make these virtual connections nowadays. No physical connection.
Strange days we live in.
Exactly. So I guess before we go into specific things that your companies are doing or you're seeing in the market to help with the pandemic, what are the broad categories of things that technology companies can do and technology can do to help solve or improve the situation right now?
So I think there's a lot that entrepreneurs and technologists can do. We actually think that this is our World War II moment, and that is not a dramatic comparison, because this is a pandemic where if nothing is done, tens of millions of people might die, and so the scale of the threat is actually quite similar. If you look at the sort of mid-range epidemiological models for inaction, and so that's quite daunting, but it's also really inspiring, because if you look at what came out of the World War II mobilization effort, we got mass production of antibiotics. We got blood plasma as a therapeutic. We got skin grafts, mass immunization. The initial flu vaccine actually came out of the World War II mobilization effort. We got pressurized plane cabins. We got nuclear power, the first programmable digital computer, right? And so that effort laid the technological foundation that enabled society to move forward for decades to come. And so we think that if we respond to this pandemic in the same way, we might come out of it much stronger than we were before. And so I think there's a whole host of immediate challenges that COVID-19 is presenting that we don't have solutions for, right? Everything from masks, from personal protective equipment, and how to scale it up and manufacture it and get it to people who need it, which is both a manufacturing and logistical problem, to ventilators, to touchless temperature checkers if we're going to try and get back to work and figure out who might be infected, to obviously therapeutics, to vaccines, to information systems that allow the epidemiologists to make the best decisions, to antibody tests for immunity, right? So I think one of the big questions is, when are we going to allow people to go back to work? And if we can figure out who's already had the virus and is therefore immune, those people are safe to go back into the workforce. Those people should be the frontline care providers for people that have the virus now. And in every single one of those categories I just mentioned, there are huge unsolved technical challenges and problems. And so I think there's really a role for every single founder to play. If it's something as simple as enabling a work from home policy so that we can sort of flatten the curve, that's doing your part. Two, on the other extreme, actually developing the therapeutics and vaccines yourself, that's obviously doing your part too. But we need everyone to pitch in. The American slogan during World War II was "We're all in this together," and that feels really, really apt to us right now.
Yeah, that's powerful. It's giving me like tingles on my body here. So let's say I am like a technologist and either I have spare time or like I want to devote my efforts towards this. Like, what can we do?
Yeah, so there are several great hubs right now where people who are attacking problems, either be they supply chain problems or manufacturing problems or vaccine issues, are posting about the needs that they have. And I think that a really great place right now is epidemiological Twitter. So there's a lot of epidemiologists. They're interfacing with healthcare providers. They're interfacing with regulatory agencies. And so that's a really great place to go and learn what are the needs of today. And I think one of the interesting things is that the needs change really, really fast. So when we were trying to scale up testing, which we're still in the middle of, the first thing that broke in the supply chain was the RNA extraction kits, basically reagents that you need to get RNA out of a sample. And then that was solved. And then immediately 4 days later, it was the swabs that you need to stick into people's nose to actually collect the samples. That became scarce. Next week, it'll be something else. And so because this is changing so quickly, it's really important to sort of be a part of these communities so that you can figure out how to best contribute.
Yeah, I think one of the crazier things is just trying to fight an exponential with like such a large mobilization effort that I feel like things are changing so fast on both sides, right? And epidemiologist Twitter, that's cool, but that's, surely there's someone's just made a website that has like all the right information. Twitter is like a very kind of decentralized kind of approach to like being on top of information.
For sure. There's two places immediately. So Sam Altman, Sama at SAMA on Twitter, launched a website with some friends of his that collects volunteer efforts and people that need volunteer efforts. And then there's a guy, Joe Wilson, based out of Los Angeles, who's a partner at a fund called Mars Bio. So you can look him up on Twitter. And he also created a website that has been collecting a lot of efforts to solve a lot of the problems that we talked about earlier. So I think those are the two immediate resources that you can go where people have already vetted a lot of the projects to see if you can contribute personally. And then I would say as entrepreneurs, as people running companies, I think it really is a time for everyone to sort of examine what resources they have that they might be able to contribute towards this effort. And oftentimes, those turn out to be great businesses after the crisis is done. The company that developed the Minute Maid orange juice, that was actually a wartime effort to figure out a way of getting a delicious nutrition to soldiers on the front line. So they developed this powder, Minute Maid, and it turned out to be a really great business afterwards because it turns out that a lot of people want cheap, delicious nutrition, and they ended up selling that company to Coca-Cola for a large amount of money. And so I would really suggest that every entrepreneur really examine if there is a role that they can play, if there's something that they can build internally that will help people that are directly attacking this crisis, because not only is it the right thing to do now, and it will let our economy get going, which is good for all business, but it might turn out to be something that has real value even after the crisis has passed.
How much of this is like about government action? Like, I mean, there is a way to obviously influence government action. Actually, James Tamplin made this like great website called COVID Act Now. Have you seen that? Which is like a state by state.
That's a good one too.
What's going to happen if you don't act? Is there other things we can do to like try to influence the government and states to like do the right thing?
Ideally, the response to any pandemic like this should be orchestrated at the federal level. There's really no way of tiptoeing around it other than to say that the people in office right now are just incredibly incompetent in the administration. We have amazing people at the FDA. We have amazing people at the Center for Disease Control. And if you follow their guidance, it's been exactly what epidemiologists should suggest. It's been what health officials should suggest. It's just not being heeded by the people in the administration, who seem to have a much greater enthusiasm for preventing the stock market from declining than actually solving the underlying health crisis, which is what we need to do to get the stock market going at the end of the day anyway. And so I don't think there's much room for pressuring the federal government, but what we've seen is that a lot of state governments have picked up the call. So I've been really, really impressed with California leadership, both at the local level and at the state level. San Francisco and the Bay Area communities were one of the first to actually impose a shelter-in-place order, and then our Governor Gavin Newsom proposed it and put it into effect statewide. And it's really hard to know exactly how effective these policies have been because our testing regime is really inadequate. But there's a company out there that makes a connected thermometer, and they've been publishing this data on fevers and how the fever rate now compares to what it normally is at this time in the season. And you can actually track the fever rate in California. Before the shutdown, it was way above norm, and now it's actually slightly below norm. If you look at the exact same data for Florida, it's going up and up and up. And because they haven't imposed any sort of shutdown, they haven't suggested that businesses close. And if you look at the data for New York City, likewise, it goes up and up and up, and only right now is starting to tip after the action. And then the hopeful thing is that at some point we need a mass supply of antibody tests. So there are these tests that are they're called IgG tests, where you can basically test to see if your body has an oversupply of the antibodies that are involved in fighting off this virus. And if you do have that, it means that you have already been infected and are now immune. And one of the interesting things about this virus is that a large number of people are asymptomatic. I think the next step, and the thing that I think right now is not being paid nearly enough attention to, is getting a very, very large supply of these antibody tests so that we can all start to test ourselves to see if we are now immune.
Okay, so let's go back to kind of technology. Everyone's like waiting for this vaccine. Is it realistic for that to happen like in any sort of short time frame? Like what are your thoughts on like this vaccine kind of being the savior?
I think the vaccine's coming. I mean, if there has been one clear silver lining here, it's been the speed at which the scientific community has reacted to this. So the viral DNA was sequenced and released online by Chinese researchers before the virus even left China, which is already a really amazing thing. It's a level of collaboration that we haven't really seen before. And then from the time that sequence was posted online to having an actual vaccine in humans for testing was 66 days. And if you told anyone that 3 years ago we could develop something so quickly, they would say you're nuts. And so I think it's a testament not only to the level of scientific collaboration we've seen here across borders, but also the sort of synthetic biology infrastructure that we've built over the last 5 years, which will enable us to respond to these things. And so I think that's been one really, really optimistic side of these things. We need to test these vaccines to see if they're safe. So right now, Moderna has a vaccine. There's about 20 other companies that have some sort of vaccine strategy. And so I am hopeful that we will find a vaccine. The difficult thing about vaccines is that they have a very high safety bar, rightly so, because vaccines are things you're putting into healthy people. And so if you're putting a drug into someone that's healthy, you really want to make sure that that drug is pretty safe, because otherwise you might be taking an otherwise healthy person and making them incredibly sick. And so I don't think we're going to have a vaccine on market for minimum 8 months. And that would require an absolute breakneck speed from the FDA and an approval process like we've never seen before. And so I think a more likely trajectory towards a solution is a therapeutic. So something that can take someone who already is infected and then clear them of the infection. And the reason it's likely to be faster is because the safety burden for a therapeutic is lower, because now you're actually taking the drug and you're putting it into someone who's already sick, right? So you can tolerate a little bit more risk because that person is already at risk, unlike a healthy person. Also, therapeutics are preferable in a case like this because you don't have to manufacture nearly as many. For a vaccine strategy to work, you have to, in a place like the United States, manufacture 100+ million vaccine doses, because you need to put into a lot of people to prevent the spread. If you can get a therapeutic working, you can now only treat those that are sick, which means you should have to manufacture less, which means the scale up should be easier and quicker. And so I'm pretty optimistic on both fronts. I think we'll have therapeutics, will have vaccines. Whether or not they will come in the next few months is very unclear, but for sure we're going to have to wait for the regulatory process to play out. And so I don't think that we can rely on those to be a silver bullet that sort of ends this thing in the next couple months.
Is there no therapeutic that China had that was very successful and we don't need to do as much testing because they've already proven some ground for it?
There are a few studies that were done in China. Most of them were not up to the standard of a well done, blinded, randomized trial. These are more experiential things where a bunch of doctors tried a bunch of different things to see what worked. And so those can give you promising candidates that we should definitely put through a more rigorous testing process. But China just didn't have a time to set up the sort of trial that you would normally set up for something like this. And so they can point to some things that look like they might work, but even the CFDA, which is the Chinese FDA, is now going through their own trial process to test a lot of the therapeutics in a more rigorous fashion.
How do we stop this in the future? Is it just, have these processes in place and just act quicker? Can we get vaccine production down to 2 months? Where's the world? Where's the optimistic thing we could get to after the experiences we've had here?
Yeah, so Balaji on Twitter, I think made a great point that the lockdowns and the shelter in places, they're akin to kind of holding your breath, right? It's what we have to do now to make sure that this doesn't just sort of light the world on fire, but it's not a long-term solution. You can't hold your breath forever. And the solution here long-term is technology. It's the ability to build and launch diagnostics quickly and cheaply. It's the ability to build vaccines quickly and cheaply, and therapeutics. And so I am really optimistic. And again, if you look back at the World War II analogy, there was a guy named Henry Kaiser, and he was a shipbuilder. And at that time, to build a sort of ship the size of a naval vessel took about 365 days. So it took about a year. And that obviously was not great for the war effort. And so the federal government said, listen, we need ships built faster. Who can do it? And Henry Kaiser actually ended up building a full naval ship in 5 days. Fastest it was ever done.
How do you do that?
He did it by innovating on the process of manufacturing, right? So he manufactured different parts of the ship in different areas, and then figured out this way of kind of snapping them together in a way that had never been done before. And this enabled him to have a really fantastic shipbuilding business after the war, right? So this is a perfect effort of a technology solution that enabled the war to help be won, to help win the war, and then also enabled him to build a business empire afterwards. And by the way, it's really interesting. He went on to found Kaiser Steel and Kaiser Aluminum and Kaiser Permanente, the largest sort of healthcare network in California. And so this is, for me, really inspiring, because I want to know, what company will bring the development of vaccines down from a year to weeks, right, out of this crisis? What company will figure out how to find repurposed drugs to act as therapeutics instead of in months, in days? I think probably right now we're developing that technology that will not only help us solve COVID-19, but that will leave us as a species more resilient to the next outbreak. And I love that because it's a way of not only generating incredible social value, but also incredible economic wealth for the people involved. And so I really do think that we're probably right now building technology infrastructure to combat this crisis that will make the world a better place for decades to come.
Yeah, it seems like the other thing that's lacking is just information just doesn't flow very smoothly, right? Like it doesn't make sense that there isn't like a very swift kind of supply chain, this logistics infrastructure where the supply and demand can like meet together.
I mean, I totally agree. And frankly, it's a failure of federal leadership, right? That is the role of the federal government. The reason that we all pay taxes is so that when there needs to be collaboration on a mass scale, people can do it for us. And in better times and in other crises, we've had that. I just think that in this particular time, our current administration was under-equipped to handle that kind of collaboration. And so, yeah, we've been seeing companies do it themselves, right? You know, Apple just announced that they use their supply chain expertise to procure 10 million N95 masks for healthcare workers. Like, it's amazing that they did that. They should not have had to have done that. You know, Elon Musk was able to find 1,000 ventilators, right? That is definitely something the federal government should have been doing. We're actually talking to factories in China about the touchless thermometers. And what we're hearing, by the way, is that a lot of the capacity is already spoken for by Asian governments and European governments. You know who has not reached out to them? The American government. Right? And if we don't do that, the entire capacity of those factories is going to be spoken for, which means we're not going to have the ability to test people, and then we're not going to have the ability to get back to work. And so there are a lot of things that you would typically expect to happen at the federal level that are now happening through businesses and through entrepreneurs, which is amazing that they're picking up the slack, but unfortunately, it's just not going to be as efficient.
Yeah. I mean, there's something about the nature of the American system that's like way more decentralized, where like there's so many states and cities that have like way more power. Like in the UK, everything is happening like top down. And like, I guess when you're fighting a pandemic, like top down, it works a little better than like bottoms up. What do you think? Like this, you know, the administration's like whole kind of positioning is like, we have a really great private sector with like tons of innovation and capacity, and that is like, you know, capitalism is going to save America here. And you know, we've talked about that a little bit in this podcast about like, you know, innovation and technology. Like, is that like, can we just rely on that to save the day?
No. You know, it's like we couldn't rely on capitalism to win World War II, right? If the government was like, hey, the companies will figure it out, right? Germany would probably now control a large swath of Europe, if not the United States. What happened was you had federal leadership that said, this is what we need to do. This is how we're going to win it. Hey, business community, this is what we need of you. If you supply this, here's the pool of capital. Go build, right? The direction needs to come from the top, because they're the only people that have the systemic view. They're the only people that know exactly what needs are where. And so in previous crises, you've had the federal government not building everything themselves, but providing both guidance and guaranteed capital to the private sector to go find the solutions. This is what happened in World War II, and it was an amazing success. And so I don't know why this administration has not provided that guidance and the guarantees of contracts to the private companies that can build these solutions. It's not that you have to go and do it yourself as the federal government, but there needs to be some leadership. Otherwise, you have a bunch of different companies that might think that they should go in a bunch of different ways. And so I think that's why our response has not been quite as coherent as one would like.
Have you ever read the book Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb?
I've bought it. I haven't read it.
Read it. But it's, you know, the whole concept is about how like, yeah, the systems that are fragile, that like small kind of, well, I guess like black swan type events can like kind of shatter them, and then the other systems that even improve when they're tested. So like the human body, like when you do exercise, gets like stronger and better. Mm-hmm. I wonder if like this is going to shift the world a little bit towards like a better, more anti-fragile state. Like just like we're gonna, you know, we can't rely quite as much on global supply chains anymore, and we can't quite be, you know, we have to all individually and as companies be able to last out like 6 months without, you know, without income potentially. Like, you know, and like in the way the world was like heavily kind of leveraged and in debt in lots of different situations. Do you think that could be like a positive we get out of this in the medium term?
Oh, there will be positives that come of this, right? So I think our ability to respond to future pandemics will make us less fragile. I think that in the same way the 2008 financial crisis led to some reforms in the financial sector that has made that sector way stronger and way less fragile. It's amazing that the stock market can plunge 35% and we're not talking about crises in the banking sector, right? Why is that the case? That's the case because the 2008 crisis revealed some unbelievable weaknesses that have now been fixed, right? And so in a very similar way, I think that this crisis will for sure reveal some weaknesses in the way we've been going about life, both in terms of pandemic response and potentially in terms of supply chain, that will enable the entire world to run more efficiently and more resiliently afterwards. So I'm for sure, I'm an optimist. I think that long term we will emerge stronger from this. But I also think that there's some fires right in front of us that we've also got to put out. Oh, and by the way, I want to mention something. So, and it's something we've never done in our history, never thought we would do. But in the we're all in this together and we all have a role to play. We did this over the weekend. We actually went to all 12 of our portfolio companies that are directly addressing this crisis, and we offered all of them an uncapped note to accelerate those efforts. And as I'm sure you know, uncapped notes are the most sort of founder-friendly thing you can do. As an investor, they're not great because you're taking a bunch of risk now and you're only getting a sort of price for a round later. But we thought it was really important, not only to let our founders know that it was okay for them to pursue these solutions, but also to give them real capital to actually accelerate those efforts. And so it's a small thing that we felt that we could do to help our founders address COVID. And it's something that we hope other funds might also do, right? I think every fund can take some small percentage of their overall fund and just offer it to their founders working on this on an uncapped note, just to let those founders go faster and farther.
That is incredible you did that. What's a startup idea do you wish someone would invest or implement or do right now?
There's this new technology called directed evolution of enzymes. So basically, enzymes are these molecular machines. They most of the work in the body is done by these enzymes, but they're historically really hard to engineer. It's really hard to get an enzyme to do what you want it to do because their function, so what they do, is defined not only by their genomic sequence, so the code of their DNA, but also by their morphology, so the way these things fold in three-dimensional space. So these enzymes are these complex structures, and if an enzyme with the same sequence folds like this versus folds like this, it does something totally different. And so the ability to engineer enzymes has eluded bioengineering for a really long time. Well, in 2008, this woman, Frances Arnold, she's a professor at Caltech, figured out this way of using the power of evolution to get enzymes to do what we want them to do. So basically, you get 3 enzymes that are maybe the closest at doing what you want them to do. You randomly damage those enzymes. For instance, you can just irradiate them. So now you have 1,000 different variants of those enzymes. You set up an experimental setup where the enzymes that do what you want them to do survive and the other ones get destroyed. You then take the 3 winners, you randomly damage them, and you rinse and repeat. And it turns out that through this process, you can get an enzyme that does what you want it to do. You have no idea why it does it. So if you say, like, what changes did you make to get this enzyme to work? You're like, I don't know, but it works. So it's a pure engineering approach to enzyme engineering. And a lot of our companies, Solugen, and we have another company, are based on this technology. I would love to see a startup that basically turned directed evolution of enzymes into a service. I think it could be a really, really interesting sort of infrastructure layer company in the synthetic biology industry.
Well, so what do you make with enzymes? I mean, it sounds cool, but how do you actually then apply the enzyme to something?
You can use enzymes to do almost anything. So you can, in the body, enzymes write DNA. One of our companies, Solugen, is making industrial chemicals using enzymes. So they're making hydrogen peroxide, glucuric acid, and they think they can make dozens and dozens more. We have another company that's making unnatural amino acids for therapeutics using enzymes. Enzymes are actually used a lot in soaps because they're really great at getting grime out of clothes. So enzymes are very, very versatile. Again, like they're the biological machines that do most of the work in biology. But historically, it's been really hard to get them to do stuff that we want them to do. So we think that that enzyme engineering and getting enzymes to do useful stuff will be one of the most valuable areas of biological engineering in the years to come. And we think there's a potentially really interesting sort of infrastructure layer company that enables this to sort of run as a service.
All right, Seth, this has been awesome. Thanks for joining us and being so informed and informative. Whereas, if someone has an idea for you, or they want to get in touch, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, I'm Seth Bannon on Twitter, and then hello@50.vc. We read every single email that comes to there, so we would love to hear if anyone wants to get in touch.